Baby Jesus is coming, and my house is a mess. I mean that both poetically and literally, and we will get to the poetic in a moment, but for now, let's stay in the literal. Matt, my patient and well-put-together partner, will be happy to tell you all about it. He will tell you that I am the one most responsible for the mess in our home, which is true, and that he is the one most responsible for consistently pointing out the mess in our home, which is also true. It is the perfect partnership. But it is not the perfect setting for guests. Dishes pile up in the sink, beds go unmade, laundry piles up on the floor, grime builds up in the bathtub. On the cover of your bulletin, the ever-wise prophet Rumi says that being human is a guest house. But in our home, that statement kind of gets flipped around. Our home is not really fit to be a guest house. Instead, it is basically just a shrine to being human. Messily human. And I don't really mind it. I regularly add to the mess. And Matt often stays relatively quiet in his grumblings. The perfect partnership. But this past Thanksgiving, our home was forced to become a guest house for 5 whole days as we hosted 6 very important visitors, not Jesus, but close. On one side, my sister, her husband, and their 21-month-old toddler, Malachi. On the other side, my brother, his wife, and their 6-month-old baby, Glenn. And though my family doesn't tend to be judgmental on the house cleaning front, preparing our home for the arrival of a 21-month-old and a 6-month-old basically felt like Advent always feels. There's a very special visitor on the way, and your house is a mess, and you just know that this is the year that everything falls apart. But nobody pointed out any obvious dust bunnies, or the fact that our kitchen rug smells vaguely of dog urine covered up by lavender oil. And the babies, these special babies who love their gay uncles, their gunkles, these babies were as sweet as could be. 6-month-old Glenn is a bundle of baby joy. I never once heard him cry over the course of 5 days. He continually let out loud exclamations of what seemed like pure elation every few minutes, left little minuscule magnificats everywhere he went, bursts of constant childish cheer. And it was amazing to watch him interact with 21-month-old Malachi, because while Glenn is still stuck in wide-eyed, innocuous babyland, Malachi is actively experimenting with how to be a human being. And being a human being, as many of you human beings probably know, is a messy balance. My favorite part of Malachi's current experimentation is that he is hovering between 2 very distinct personalities, the selfish Scrooge and the generous giver. He has 2 phrases that he says more than anything else. No, and here you go. The extent of his vocabulary basically consists of these 2 phrases plus about 15 farm animal noises. And I watched Malachi alternate between these 2 phrases every time Glenn would happily grab one of Malachi's toys. Now, phrase 1 would come almost effortlessly. Whenever Glenn would grab a toy, Malachi would grab it back and shout, "No!" and keep the toy safely held in his own hand, denying the confused but still smiling Glenn. But then phrase 2 would sneak in just as often when Malachi would actually go out of his way to hand toys to Glenn and sweetly say, "Here you go." It was so confusing. It was as if Malachi would periodically forget that his own joy was inextricably linked to Glenn's joy. It was as if Malachi would periodically forget that joy is and should be a communally renewable resource. I can only imagine that this was continuously confusing for little baby Glenn. But isn't that state of hovering between being continuously confused and confusing so very human? We humans are so consistently inconsistent, continuously wavering between saying no and here you go every moment of our lives. We are seeking joy, but we regularly forget whether joy is something we get for ourselves by grabbing back the toy in self-satisfying stinginess, or whether joy is something we co-create with everybody else by handing the toy back in an effort to make generous connection. And speaking of joy, I have not heard that holiday classic, Joy to the World, playing in any store that I have been in this season. And I'm just starting to think that everybody is too bummed out to play it. I basically begged Hanko if we could sing it today just to see if I could still shape my mouth around that word, joy. I feel like every single piece of news media I consume is filling my head and heart with no, no, no. But thankfully, today, our Christian tradition is ready to take in all of those leftover no's clutching our hearts and offer back a hearty, here you go. Today, little Madeline lit what's called the shepherd's candle. And that's the third light in our Advent wreath, and that candle represents joy, whether we like it or not. Joy, which despite its slippery nature remains one of my top 3 favorite words. I'll tell you the other 2 in some other sermons. But beyond some lyrics in old Christmas carols, I don't know how often we think of the deep, theological, metabolic, communal potential of true joy. True joy. I know I don't often differentiate between my own desire for some transient, temporary, self-interested happiness versus real, expansive, long-lasting, collective joy. And happiness, though tangential to joy, can't capture the mystical depths of what that little 3-letter word represents. Our English vocabulary can't seem to plumb those depths. Even quick online searches for the definition of joy fail to differentiate it from plain old happiness or pleasure. But real joy moves beyond a fluctuating state of individual well-being, of individual satisfaction, of individual toy hoarding, and points towards something life-alteringly different. And this movement from individual satisfaction to something more powerfully social justice-minded, what I think Mary does in her Magnificat, is something we all need these days. She makes way for the joyful queerness at the center of Christianity. And I really do think that choosing joy is a queer choice these days, when the status quo is to respond with fear, hate, hopeless noise. I just invented a word. Hopeless noise. Tweet it. Don't let anybody steal it. Holy cow. Shakespeare's like in the room. Hopeless noise. I'll question it later, but choosing joy is the queer choice when those are all of the things facing us. And Mary's little song of joyful praise packs a big punch in Luke's gospel, and it's the longest bit of text spoken by a woman in the gospel. And did you know that it harkens back to the song of another woman? Anybody know the woman who sang a song that Mary's sort of mirroring here? Oh, we got a Bible scholar here. Hannah. You know who Hannah is? Hannah is the mother of Hebrew prophet Samuel in the Hebrew scriptures. And both Mary's song, grandly called the Magnificat, and Hannah's song are exclamations of celebration. Both utilize distinctly similar language, and both start in a place of somewhat bewildered individual praise for the fact that something is growing inside them. And then that song stretches the spiritual possibilities beyond their own bodies, beyond their own celebrations, to define exactly what this power might hold for everyone. And whether or not you believe in the historical validity of Hannah and her son Samuel, or Mary and her son Jesus, the literary devices used in these songs of praise offer all of us a model for how the joy of our own songs and souls can be magnified when we link those songs and souls to the songs and souls of everyone else. Now, did this stuff really happen? I don't know. Was Mary so well-read in Hebrew scriptures that she had internalized Hannah's song? Or is this just a literary device used by Luke to plant Mary's song in a long tradition and give it more rhetorical power? Either way, Mary's song, just like Hannah's, starts off in the personal. You can look at it. I won't be offended if you look down at the text right now. Mary's song starts off in the personal. Lots of I and my and me statements. But then around the 7th line, the I statements give way to a more communal message about what God, whatever God is, can do for all. Mary knows what God can do because she feels it in the particularity of her own experience, but she doesn't stop there. She can't stop there. She can't keep it there, simply stuck in her own fleeting happiness. She takes her joy, turns to the rest of the world, and says, "Here you go." And if we track what happens after Mary's decision through to the end of the Christmas story, we see that everyone involved in this epic, when faced with a fear-filled decision, basically makes the queer choice for joyful, community-minded connection. Track it. Gabriel tells Mary she's going to birth joy. Mary is afraid and could say no. But instead, she makes the queer choice for joy, takes her heart and body and resources and says, "Here you go." And then Mary tells Joseph, and Joseph is afraid and could say no. But instead, he makes the queer choice for joy, takes his heart and body and resources and says, "Here you go." And then the shepherds, basically the lower class, hear about the guests coming to birth their baby in a stable, and they are afraid and could say no. But instead, they make the queer choice for joy, take their heart and bodies and resources and say, "Here you go." And then the wise men, the magi, basically the upper class, hear about the guests coming to birth their baby in a stable, and they are afraid and could say no. But instead, they make the queer choice for joy, take their heart and bodies and resources and say, "Here you go." And we all know what happens when this baby grows up, right? We all know that our Christmas tradition is about to give way to our Easter tradition. But for these 4 weeks of Advent, our spiritual ancestors and we make the queer choice for joy in the face of fear. We take our hearts and our bodies and our resources and we say, "Here you go." Because our Christmas story assures us that when we do this, we are not offering these things on our own. We are held by a continuous chain of people making this choice. And within this chain, joy is a renewable resource. Now, our English language, as usual, has no way to actually talk about joy as a communally renewable resource. In fact, the only way I've found to even come close to defining such joy is not through a concept in our Christian tradition, but through a concept in the Buddhist tradition. So thank God, or whatever, that we don't simply live in a Christian nation, because I had to go to the Buddhists for this word. And if you take only one thing from this sermon or this service today, besides those amazing child singers, I want it to be this word, a word from Sanskrit and Pali, mudita. Will you say it with me? Mudita. Just feel that in your mouth. Mudita. Anyone know what this word means? Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. We've got hopeless noise and now mudita. There is no perfect English counterpart for mudita, but the closest we can get to its definition is the idea of sympathetic joy, unselfish joy, taking joy in the success of others. And to Buddhists, this is pure joy, unadulterated by self-interest. This is not a temporary, transient, cheerful state. This is a deep practice of embodying joy through solidarity with the joyful thriving of one another. And in this country's current climate, mudita, unselfish joy, is a form of blessed, messy resistance. It burrows deeper than the surface happiness our capitalistic crust tells us we should pursue. In fact, Buddhists believe that if the seed of mudita is methodically cultivated, it will start to break through our scroogey surface of suffering, jealousy, evil, cold-heartedness, and flower into a continuing chain reaction of virtues, leading to emotional and material generosity, more genuine friendliness, and a deeper sense of compassion. You see the difference here? It's not just joy for myself. It's taking joy in another person's joy. It's taking joy in joy that sort of has nothing to do with your own joy until you make it have something to do with your own joy. And if you find it hard to imagine practicing mudita in the face of all the mess of your life or of this country or of this world, when it seems like we hover too much between no and here you go, I want you to remember a saying from a beloved Hindu guru, Nisargadatta Maharaj. Again, you'll notice I needed to go to another fake tradition to get a fresh take on our tradition. Isn't it so wonderful that Christianity doesn't have to be our only resource? Trapped in some self-satisfied, whitewashed vacuum. This guru said, when I look inside and see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that is love. And between these two, my life flows. And this is a messy balance, but it's a messy balance struck by Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men and all who want to actually cultivate mudita. They become wise enough to realize that they are only parts of the greater whole, and then they become loving enough to see that the fact makes them responsible to all of the others around them. Even if your literal house isn't messy, chances are that your life feels a little bit messy right now. No judgment. I am a really messy person. Judson is a pretty messy guest house, so you're in good company. But thankfully, joy doesn't require a pristinely clean environment. Joy simply asks that we open up our space to be a crowded table where we realize that we are nothing and everything, all at the same time, where we don't hoard joy for ourselves, but instead think of joy as a well of renewable resources into which we pour our own joy and out of which we draw the joy of one another. It's messy, but it's the only authentic way to sustain joy. Baby Jesus is coming, and our house is a mess. Are you saying no when you could be saying, here you go? Are you too stuck in your own feelings of thinking you are nothing or of thinking that you are everything? Neither is true on their own. and both are true together. And at the end of the day, we're all dummy jugglers, tossing our hearts out into the world and praying that somebody catches it, or at least picks it up off the floor. So let's make a pact to juggle our hearts together. Your guest house doesn't need to be clean. Nobody's really is. Your guest house just needs to be open. We're all afraid. We're all a mess. There's no question about it. The real question is, what do we do with this mess? And maybe we'll find the start of an answer in this poem prayer from Prophet Mary Oliver. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I have swept and I have washed, but still nothing is as shining as it should be for you. Under the sink, for example, is an uproar of mice. It is the season of their many children. What shall I do? And under the eaves and through the walls, the squirrels have gnawed their ragged entrances, but it is the season when they need shelter, so what shall I do? And the raccoon limps into the kitchen and opens the cupboard while the dog snores, the cat hugs the pillow. What shall I do? Beautiful is the new snow falling in the yard, and the fox who is staring boldly up the path to the door. And still, I believe you will come, Lord. You will. When I speak to the fox, the sparrow, the lost dog, the shivering sea goose, know that really I am speaking to you whenever I say, as I do all morning and afternoon, come in. Come in. Amen.